Welcome to the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies, along with our host of UCLA Transformative Coaching and Leadership, our web series in Zoom on critical conversations. Tonight, I am super excited to bring along two women that have been amazing influencers in their industries. And let me go ahead and get started. As a former coach at UCLA, one of the things that I appreciate the most is the women tonight have actually walked the walk. They've played the game, they've coached the game, they've managed people, teams, and companies. So let's get to it. Let's meet our first guest tonight. Jill Ellis, the all-time winning coach in U.S. soccer history. She's a former head coach of UCLA, 12 years as UCLA's Bruin soccer coach. She is a two-time World Cup champion and a two-time FIFA Coach of the Year. Her overall record, 106 wins, 7 losses, 19 ties. That's a lot of winning, people. I think what's impressive about Jill is wherever she goes, she changes the landscape. When she was at UCLA, she took our UCLA Bruin team to, I believe it was 8 Final Four appearances. I think there were 7 in a row, took us to the Final Four. Pac-10 championships, 6 straight. And she's the only female coach to hold a USSF pro license. She did it on the pitch too. A former Division I soccer player, a graduate of William and Mary. Join me in welcoming my colleague and my friend, Coach Jill Ellis. Hello, my friend. How are you? Well, right now we're going to go ahead and introduce our next guest. She's a boss woman and somebody that is really familiar with taking a hold of the reins and creating and developing and building momentum. Join me in welcoming Megan Kahn. Let me tell you a little bit about her. Welcome, Megan. She has served formerly as the executive director of WeCOACH and now in her 4th year is the CEO. WeCOACH is a wonderful organization that is actually identifying, developing, sustaining women in coaching. And I'm really excited to have her here. Let me tell you a little bit about her. In 2018, she led the organization through a world-class rebrand from Alliance of Women Coaches to WeCOACH. They've put together one of their most successful events, the inaugural event last year, the Breakthrough Summit, who, by the way, awarded their inaugural Lifetime Achievement Award winner to Jill Ellis. So there's a little bit of a connection there already tonight. Prior to WeCOACH, she worked in 2 conference offices, the ACC and the Atlantic 10, and she began her career in coaching. She's a individual that managed NC2A Final Fours, but she's also been on the court, a former basketball player and coach from Truman State. Join me in welcoming Megan Kahn. Hello, my friend.
Thank you. Excited to be here, Sue.
Hey,
wow.
Sue. Hey, Megan. Good to see you.
So nice. It's so nice to see you guys. It's going to be fun. I think our goal tonight, we have educators, we have administrators, we have coaches, we have alumnus here. We collected some of those questions along the way. We're going to go ahead and drop those in. But as much as you look different in your resumes, one that took a coaching career, one that took administrative career, what's really interesting from a transformative place is you are both builders. And I really would love to do deep dives around how you do create momentum, how you change strategies to make things better. And at the end of the day, the life lessons you've learned that we're going to steal from you tonight. So let's get started. I'd first love to start with Jill. I really want to talk about most of this world, this sport world, knows you as the head coach of our USA women's soccer team, our defending gold medalists. And you came in there and you had to really do an evaluation and make some tough decisions along the way. Many leaders out there have to do that. I want to talk about, give us some insight about some of the things that you had to do going in right away that you said, gosh, I think we need to do these 3-4 things to take it to the next level. Share with us your insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, when I first came in, it was kind of an interesting journey, because when I came in, I had a pretty short run up to the first major world event. And it really was a very successful team that I inherited, although it had been 16 years since we, won a world championship. And so really coming in initially, I had a good sense of the team because I had been the assistant. So I'd already done kind of my SWOT analysis in terms of what I needed. And in truth, it was to take a slightly different path to a major world event than we'd ever taken before. We had gone to a certain number of games, certain events, and I just decided to shake things up. But when I first sat in front of the team, when you're working with elites, it's first getting them to hook, right? To buy in. And so I stood in front of them, and this is like an Olympic championship team ranked #1 in the world. I put up that quote: even if you're on the right track, if you sit there, you'll get run over. Because what we know about elites is they love the challenge. And so when you can kind of poke them a little bit to say, okay, where we are today is not good enough to win next summer, that was really kind of the idea behind that march towards 2015. Very different in 2019. Coming off a massive loss in 2016. And that was really the approach there. Was we had to modernize, we had to innovate. We had to change certain profiles. When you build a team, you look at what do you have and what do you have to meet the demands of, right, in terms of the game. And so I pretty quickly realized that we had to bring in and deepen our roster and play a competitive schedule. And when you do that, to your point, that's when you come to those forks in the road where you have to make tough decisions. And I think for me, the best way I calibrate it is always, I'm doing this, making this decision, what's best for the team. So whether it's putting a veteran on the bench, whether it's lowering somebody's contract because I was in charge of that, whether it's playing time, naming rosters, you can't get caught up because some of the players that had a really close relationship in 2015 now had a completely different role. And that sometimes changes the dynamic of those relationships. But I think it's that commitment to team first, building a culture that understands that the team is the star, and then really kind of following through in those tough moments and those tough decisions in what you believe.
When you talk about making those tough decisions for the star, which is the team, give us one or two things every night when your head hits the pillow. You're doing the right thing because of your values. So when the politicking happens, when the media is just all over your grill, share with us how you sleep well at night, making those tough decisions. Because now you look like a hero because everything looked great. But I remember those times and how hot and contentious it was. Share with us how you sleep well at night regarding those.
I think I go all the way back to my father, who raised me as someone that should, when you come to that juncture, don't stress in that situation, embrace that moment, because it's a privilege to sit in that space, meaning you have decisions, you have choices to make. So, certainly I think the true north for me was, this is what the team needs. And that was the guiding principle. I mean, I even had to, let one of my dear friends who was on my staff go because it just wasn't fitting the role of what the team needed. And how do you sleep at night? I think that's how you recognize that you're putting yourself, you're putting others, you're putting individuals ahead of everything to make these hard decisions for the team. I think I try and lead with truthfulness and empathy. So I was always, I think because I could sleep at night, because I always would share the very honest, hard parts of the message. I wouldn't skirt issues. I wouldn't candy coat issues. So I always led with a truthfulness. And so that also allowed me, I think, to understand that there's no hidden agenda here. There's no corners that are shadowed. It's being very upfront and very open. And trying also to have empathy. It's tough when you're making these decisions to, essentially you're hurting people's feelings. You're picking one over the other. You're leaving people out. It's a tough spot to be in, but I always try and put myself in that person's position. So even if a player reacts, negatively perhaps to the information, I always try and put myself in that position of understanding how this person feels. I think that's kind of what I try to do.
Megan, when you listen to Jill, I bet you there's a lot of things that you relate to. Here you come to an organization that's doing great stuff. A lot of the country is super happy. But then you come in and the world sees the influence that you've created. Can you break it down, how the thought process, the strategy that you took? Tell us a little bit about WeCOACH, so our listeners that don't have the full information, and how you made those hard decisions, because before people see the end result, they're like, what's going on here? We're going to go through a name change, and what we're going to be doing. Walk us through that. I think our listeners are going to be able to hear the parallels.
Oh my gosh, speaking of name change, that was probably, of all the things I've done in my career, is probably one of the most challenging things I've ever done in my career. With a board of directors, we have 15 highly opinionated women about what the colors should be, what that name should be, and trying to navigate. It was probably my first foray in trying to create unity. So much as Jill is talking about leadership and buy-in and creating that sense of culture. At the end of the day, when we walked out of that room, if everyone didn't agree, that was okay. But when we walked out of the room, we all had to be on the same page. When I came in 2014, really, and took over in 2016, our bread and butter was the NCAA Women Coach Academies. Hands down, what we were known for are still to this day one of our premier events. But it was one of the only things that we did. And so here we were, this young organization, just 2 or 3 years off the ground, and we couldn't just rely on that. And that only served NCAA level coaches. And so what were we doing for NAIA coaches? What were we doing for high school coaches? What were we doing for club, youth, or at the professional level? And so we had to immediately look at broadening our scope of resources, even if it wasn't that premier opportunity to attend an in-person event. We had to find a way to touch every level of coach. And that's what makes WeCOACH unique, right? Is that we serve every sport, every level of coach. Nobody else in the world, no other organization is doing what we're doing. And so I'm a builder. You talked about it in your introduction. And so not only were we building programs and resources, but we were building a community and a movement. And so it's sort of two things, right? We have our programs and our resources, but we're also building this engaged community of like-minded women. And so I think when it came down to it, everything that we do is focused on those two things. How do we serve women? How are we nimble? How do we pivot? How do we stay timely? How do we stay relevant? Especially, oh my gosh, we just take a snapshot of what's happening right now in the industry and in the landscape as a whole. How are we pivoting to meet the needs? I mean, our women coaches need us now more than ever.
You know, I think that many times a team is a reflection of their leader, and both of you have so much humility. It was like pulling teeth to get your accolades. You are people that like to shine the light on others. Megan, when you came in, it became very clear that WeCOACH was going to build a bigger tent. You were partnering with people that I'd never seen anybody be partnering with from the women coach perspective. And we're in a time now where mentorship for women, undergraduate, high school, college, the mentorship piece is really big. And I think it's also timely. So talk to us a little bit about the mentorship and how important that is. And then Jill, I would love for you to dip in because the timing is so perfect for what's going on right now with USA Soccer and your announcement today. So Megan, share with us the philosophy, the strategies that you looked at to make that happen and the momentum you're gaining.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things really, Sue. One is that I am by no means thinking that WeCOACH is going to change the landscape alone. We are going to need everybody rowing the boat the same direction. Nobody can have holes in their oars, right? We all have to be pitching in and pulling our weight to change the landscape. If we want to move that percentage, right now we know women make up only 40%, 42% of all of the head coaches across the D1 landscape, and it's worse as we go down in level. So if we're going to really change that number, we had to quickly figure out not only how we can do it, but who are others in the space. We don't need to go out and recreate the wheel if others are doing great things in the space. And so that's really been my philosophy in finding those who align with our mission and our vision and wanting to invest in advancement and retention and even recruitment of women in the coaching profession. And so that's sort of been my philosophy of how we've gone out and sought others in the space doing great work. As it relates to our mentor, specifically to our mentor program, we were the first to develop this unique one-of-a-kind. It's a trio, right? So we went and we assessed what the sport associations were doing. We looked at what the NFL was doing. We looked at what the NCAA was doing in mentor programs that they had in place. And we saw that women, we knew from research that was out there that women were leaving the coaching profession somewhere between 7 and 10 years into their career. And so our thought was, well, if we want to have women who have this longevity in their career and get to a Hutch or a Sue Enquist or somebody like that in their career and have these long-standing careers, how we have to figure out how we keep that mid-level coach who's only 7 or 10 years in their career. And we made them the cornerstone of our mentor program. And so it's built on the trio. So it's your rookie level coach, 1 to 5 years, that mid-level coach, and then your really advanced coach. And so that's how we developed our mentor program. And it is so important, right? It's like, I think even now, as we look at women of color, there's not enough women of color in leadership positions. And so others out there, we can't look up and say, hey, there's somebody like me that's doing this. And so it doesn't even matter what industry. It's just there's not enough visible women in those leadership positions.
And you guys have done such a great job of already building those programs to answer that call around getting more of a larger strategy around equity and diversity and inclusion. And you've done it with this idea for those listeners out there. If you're, hey, I'm just Park and Rec, or I'm just high school, or you know what, I'm just an assistant AD at a state university. The great thing about WeCOACH is they are threading the needle through everyone. And this patchwork of greatness that you guys have is just phenomenal. And I think the timing is great today because if I have it right, Jill, USA Soccer just announced the program that you are driving. Tell us a little bit about your mentorship program through USA Soccer and how you're an important cog in that wheel.
Yeah, and I want to give tip my hat to Megan and her organization, because it was a few years ago. I think it was right on the back end of 2015 that it was one of the first organizations that I actually spoke at, and it was so moving to me. I was like, and I remember them saying to me, you got to get out front, you got to be visible. And I was like, so they really helped me in terms of trying. And so yes, this is the announcement today from US Soccer is at the end of last year, they created a scholarship in my name for coaching education. I'd been out kind of raising money for that program. And finally, I just sort of said to them, what are we doing with this? How can we really drive this? And I myself was a mentor for FIFA. They had a program last year, a year-long program. And I found it so incredibly rewarding. And to Megan's point, I mean, it's such a powerful vehicle for trying to build this community that US Soccer, in partnership with the scholarship, what we essentially did is polled 4,800 coaches and said, females, why are you not in coaching? Why are you not getting into it? Or why are you leaving it? And looked at all those sort of barriers and obstacles and tried to, and finally what I said is, I'm tired of answering the question that our numbers are dipping, the ratios are so often skewed, that it was like, okay, what action can we take? So the scholarship itself will help fund the coaching licenses for females. I mean, this is an organization, I had to borrow money from my folks to go take a license. So we're trying to eliminate that. And then the mentoring program, which I actually think is probably the mainstay of this whole idea, is we've basically taken sort of 35 of the top coaches in the women's soccer landscape in this country, asked them, Anson Dorrance, Leslie Gallimore, the April Heinrichs, these iconic coaches, to say, hey, would you serve as a mentor? And they were so fired up about it. And so now the A licensed coaches that are taking their license, the B license and the pro license, all of them have been assigned to someone who's very established in this sporting world. And we've done some training, et cetera, but I'm genuinely excited, because I think when you really look at part of this problem is it's opportunity, and it's opening doors for each other, and it's introductions. It's all the things that happen naturally when you're in the majority, but it's harder to find. And so I think that is something that I'm really excited about, because I hopefully the ripple effect will be not just women staying in coaching, but more women entering in coaching because they see more.
Jill, one of the things that I want to talk about, and Megan introduced some of this, is this idea of giving everybody access. And we know in this country that not everybody gets the same start. And you are familiar, you've got a legacy of coaching. Talk to me about how important it is. And this is one of the questions from our listeners. How important it is. This is what's great. Jill has lived it. Megan is building programs to help us as coaches become updated and relevant to tackle this issue of, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Jill, talk about how important it is if you are a white coach, male or female, coaching players of color, Indigenous people, whoever it is, that isn't just white, how important it is that we hear their stories and we listen to their path in these team environments, which can be probably one of the safest if we create those conditions.
No question. I mean, it is critical. In fact, just to kind of tie on what I was saying earlier, is Carla Thompson, who's a driver within U.S. Soccer. Her and I have partnered this. She's one of the very few African American coaches coaching soccer, at a higher level. And so what her and I actually did in trying to build out this mentor group was to find diversity in that. So it's so relatable now to the mentees coming through and partnering up. So, it is critical. It's not just visibility. It's understanding how it feels in terms of appreciating the path that people are walking. We can't truly understand. I mean, as women, we're obviously the minority a lot of times, but then the subset of that as women of color is even smaller. And so Carla and I had some really good conversations about this and the importance. And we honestly racked our brains and looked everywhere to find women of color to be in this program. That's how important it was. So I think it's important to listen, it's important to understand, but it's also important to be proactive in finding people out there that you can bring into this fold so now they can be a part of it and hopefully shape that.
One of the things in the Graduate School of Education and in our academy is to be proactive and to go and discover these women and tell them, hey, come on in here, you're welcome. Megan, you're building programs. Tell us a little bit about the stuff that's going on over at WeCOACH that is available to our community.
Well, I mean, gosh, you both are doing phenomenal things, especially as we look at building larger pools of women and trying to pull more women into the profession. I think, if you look at our 3 pillars of work, they're based on 3 things. One is advancement, one is retention. Those 2, I think we've done a great job in, at least on my watch. The third is recruitment. And that's the piece that we kind of have our arms around the other 2 pieces. We're just now beginning to look at that and driving that conversation. And now for the first time, we know men even outnumber women as assistant coaches. So if you're talking about this pipeline of future women coaches, it's not increasing unless we're going to go attack it and find ways to increase it. And I think as we look at young women, young girls, probably many of our listeners, somebody pulled them into the coaching profession. Somebody tapped them on the shoulder, said, hey, have you considered a career in coaching? Or, hey, do you think you'd make a great coach? Is this something you want to consider? So as we look at even graduate students and our undergrads, why aren't we identifying and nurturing women to go into the coaching profession, right? We're identifying pre-med or pre-law or other things. Why aren't we doing this at that level, especially as we look at not everyone has to go and be a college coach or professional coach. I mean, let's even just look at the grassroots level. We know dad's the t-ball coach and mom's the snack runner, right? Stereotypically, that's what we see on the field. And those are the first time our young girls and boys, for that matter, are being exposed to coaches. We need to infiltrate every level and have more women visible in coaching, girls and boys, for that matter. It doesn't matter what gender.
Well, and also for our Bruins out there, I know we have a handful that are listening. Our goal at UCLA is to partner with WeCOACH, we have a partnership with athletics, and to provide programming in leadership, potential coaching for undergraduates. And then eventually there are going to be women that say, this seems like a really interesting and viable career for me. So when you talked about women's coaching has declined and we're in the low 40s, there's a backhanded compliment in there. Because of Title IX and the growth, we've been able to put more money into programs. Now, this head coaching job, this assistant coaching job can be had by men to support their families. But for us as women, we have to do a good job to make sure that we keep those doors open, and not only just keep them open, but we go out and we recruit them. Jill, when you talk about the individual, we're now talking about the student athlete, or we're talking about that pro player. Our academy and our department is really building the principles behind transformational leadership. We're really saying this: the student and the teacher are going to learn together. We got to listen, we got to learn, and we got to advance and lift them up. Talk to me about how you go in, make those connections with those superstars, and lead this team into becoming one and going to the top and staying on top.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's great to hear, because I think it starts with that. It starts with building connections. It's, it's seeing these athletes, and, it is a little bit different going from college athletes to pros who have, these demands of agents and finances and other things on top of what they do. But, it's building a connection with them. It's trying to understand them and see them more as just more than just somebody between the white lines. They are people. I went into that World Cup and people said to me, how was it when your players were speaking out or in Twitter wars with the president, et cetera, et cetera? How was it navigating all that? And I said, first and foremost, I see them as people. Just like you sit around the dinner table, the water cooler, your family, and you talk about social issues. So to think to muzzle someone's opinion just because they have a label of an athlete, me is fundamentally wrong. It's sure, if something was negative to the environment or another individual in terms of our team, then you step in. But as a coach, I love it, the fact that people are willing to talk and speak out, because it builds a trust. I think you have a trust then to trust them that they know what it takes to get the job done, but they also can be who they are. I think that's really important. But it's, I think the thing that I tried to just at the base was to give clarity. I think that is something, if you're going to take people on a journey and go on this journey with them together, a clarity and understanding and expectations is really important. But it's also bringing them to the table. So for example, coaching the new generation, they like to take their information on in their space. So rather than having an hour and a half meeting in front of a chalkboard, it's able to use digital platforms to be able to send stuff out that they can process and then they can then bring in. You want them to feel connected to this process. And as an older coach, I have to respect their world now in terms of how they process information. We did our set pieces in 3D animation, because these are kids that don't grow up with an X and O on a chalkboard. It's 3D stuff. So trying to reach them in their space. And I think another part of what we tried to do was to bring them in to the decision-making process. And that doesn't mean you turn your reins over and say, okay, what's the game plan today, right? It's more of saying, at times when you can give choices, bring them into that conversation. So it's as simple as having 3 set plays and saying, on the first one, you decide which one we run on the first one. Or it's saying, today we're going to pressure a team and we're going to sit off. Which one would you like to do first? Now, as a coach, you only pick those moments that are in situations where it doesn't matter which one you do. Obviously, you're ahead of that in terms of that. But that feeling like they are a part of that conversation, that they are part of this decision-making process, I think that's really important with the modern athlete of today, that they feel that trust and that connection. So I think that's, at its base, that's what we tried to do, was to really, and know them, knowing that, Rose Lavelle has a bulldog named Wilma. They're not just X's and O's to you. They're humans, they're people, they have a life, and they have another realm around them that's not just sport.
And so when things started to get super crazy, our country started to get really highly politicized. You're in the middle of the World Cup. Because you already laid that foundation, dealing with all of those distractions was actually pretty manageable, because the infrastructure was already set up. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's the point, is people ask me, is it a distraction? It's like, no, because we understood why we were there. We talked about the insulation of the bubble, but it's also trusting and respecting them enough. Actually, at times it galvanized, the outside noise kind of galvanizes you inside, right? But no, it wasn't, because we knew exactly our purpose and why we were there, and nothing was going to derail us.
And when you think about how sport and society now is completely, those lines are blurred. Megan, talk about the programming that's important. Coaching is an anecdotal industry. We are learning from the coach that coached us, and then we go out and kind of wing it. Soccer is highly advanced. They've got a certification program. Most sports don't. Talk about the importance of what you all are doing around this transformational coaching and just systemizing this idea of becoming more relevant as an instructor and a teacher.
Well, let's even just take what we're going through right now. There is no playbook for anything that anyone's going through, especially as we look at the collegiate level. We talk about student athletes having a voice, and they're more powerful in their voice than ever. Social media is completely changing the landscape, and now we have name, image, likeness legislation breathing down our necks. I believe the NAI just passed it today. We know it's imminently coming here within the NCAA landscape very, very soon. And that in and of itself is going to change college athletics as we know it, even if we think COVID and what's happening with social injustice right now has changed it, and how our student athletes have more power than ever in their voice. And so, as Jill said, we're bringing them to the table, right? We're giving them input, and we're allowing them to have this more collaborative approach, and we're adjusting as coaches. And so my job is how do we continue to educate and provide our coaches so that they can help their own teams navigate this for their own personal and their team success. And so it's aligning with, I'm not an expert in name, image, likeness. So it's going and finding experts in the space to be able to go offer those resources for anyone who's a member in our organization for free. Many of our programs and resources are absolutely for free. And that's our job, especially during this time, is when our coaches need more support than ever, is that we're stepping to the plate and providing them something that they find valuable. The other thing, Sue, is by no means do I think we're going to be all things to all level of coaches, but my hope is that we can be something to every level of coach, no matter where you are in your coaching journey.
And just being able to, once again, provide new coaches. And I'd love to just speak to those moms or those women or those dads. They're just going to start to get into coaching. How important is it to have a solid foundation? Jill, when you think about your coaching career and the influencers in your life that allowed you to have that solid foundation of both the fundamentals of the game, the tactical part of the game, but also that relationship part of the game, speak to how important that is and how that lays a foundation for the future.
Oh, I mean, no doubt. I mean, obviously, there's the young levels where I think it's all about technique and enjoyment, right? I mean, that's really why kids get into it. I had some people the other day say to me, what should my kid, what path should my kid, should they specialize, should they this? And I said, just feed your kids passion. If they have 3 sports as their passion, feed that. It's not that, but I think right now it's enjoyment at the young age. But certainly as you start to, go up the ladder and in your developmental journey, having that understanding, I think one of the things I'm pushing right now with our youth coaches is, let's not be over structured, or let's at least have a period of training where there's no voices, there's no, meaning you're not telling them, hey, play here, step up, do this, do that. There's this free period of time, because I think one of the things we find in our sport is, we need the technician, or certainly we need the athlete, but we also need the decision maker. Mm-hmm. And if we're over structured too much in our coaching soccer, we lose that element. But I think the idea of, it was interesting, you guys were talking earlier, and I wanted to bring this up, is I was at this pre-COVID at this dinner in New York, and this woman comes up to me and she says, I think women should coach young boys in terms of coaches. So that she said, I have 2 sons, and right now a woman is probably the one person they listen to the most and can instruct and can critique. And she said, I think it's a natural transition for a woman to coach young boys, because obviously a lot of them are raised by their moms and such. And I thought that was interesting, because then it also exposes boys to females as leaders, right? In terms of outside of the mother. So I thought this was a fantastic idea. So going back to your question, yeah, I think there's so many resources now at ussoccer.com. I mean, they have a whole grassroots program that you can just download and take drills, etc. I think it's really important to bring some element that's going to help this kid on their pathway. For me, on a personal level, I mean, I was coached by my dad for some period of time, but he really set a strong base for me in terms of my understanding of the game, but also my passion for teaching.
You know, as we start to close in on this event, I want to give each one of you an opportunity to speak to the community on the things that are closest and landed on your heart regarding you as an influencer, and share with your community some important closing thoughts. And I would love to start with Megan, and I want to say thank you to the work that you're doing and serving so many. But in your closing thoughts, please share with the audience some of the things that you want them to know about WeCOACH and where we are in the sport.
You know, Sue, I've been so fortunate to do a lot of amazing and have some phenomenal things that I've done in my career, managing Final Fours, as you mentioned. But the most rewarding thing I've ever done is serve our awesome community of coaches. And I literally could probably count on one hand the times that I woke up and thought, oh, this feels like work today, because I'm one of those people who gets up and this never feels like work, which is awesome, because I still definitely have a passion for growing and being able to serve this community. And this is on our backs, right? It's on us if we want to make change. And if we're committed to being difference makers in the landscape, it's on us. And I love that pressure, right, Jill? You talked about pressure, you know, as a privilege. And I really think that every single day. The one thing I want to say, and I'm going to look every single one of our coaches in the eye when I say this, is that you got to invest in yourself, right? If that's financially, if that's time. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, my budget was cut, so I can't afford my WeCOACH membership, or, oh, my budget was cut, so I can no longer attend the academy. Can I get a refund? If you think your school or institution is looking out for what's best in your career, then I think you're fooling yourself, because it's you got to own your career journey. You have to invest in your development, whether that's personal development, whether that's professional development, but you have to own your career. And then the other thing I would say is stay humble, stay hungry, and dream big.
Beautiful. Jill, closing thoughts.
Damn, Megan, ditto.
I'm glad you're following that.
Yeah, I know. Thanks, Megan. Gosh, you know, well, just in terms of, like, people have asked me about my journey, and to touch on Megan, there's been a lot of great things, but I heard this quote, and I think if I had to kind of characterize one word that describes that journey, and probably for the coaches on the call and the leaders on the call, persistence is probably that word. So the quote is this. It's I won't tell you where I heard it, but it basically says something to the effect of, if you really want to appreciate the beauty of the ocean, one must love both the crest and the trough of the wave. Both are equally important to that big picture. And as I look back on my career, it's been honestly some of those troughs, some of those moments that are low. And I know, especially in this moment in time, there are people that are struggling, whether it be financially, emotionally, that those moments are actually going to steel you. Those moments are going to strengthen you to be able to get back on that crest. I'm talking to a surfer here, so I know you could. You're totally biased.
I love it.
But yeah, I think just the understanding that some of the toughest, hardest moments have actually been the moments that have been the most valued, that I wouldn't have traded. When I stepped down, my comments to the team were essentially, I'm not going to remember how many goals someone scored. I'm not going to remember gold medals or trophies that sit on a thing. I'm going to remember the moments that really made me feel. And those moments are not just the joyous moments. They're the moments that stung and that were hard. Because I think if you're going into coaching, you're into leadership, it is not all roses. It's hard. It's like Megan said, some days it's a grind. It's a job. But the big picture and how you come out of it, and the personal growth and the satisfaction that you can get, I would just say persist persist through the struggle.
Wow. To both of you, I just want to say congratulations. Thanks for coming into our UCLA bubble and sharing all your insight. Continued success. Congratulations once again to all our listeners. Thank you for listening in. Good night.